Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to In Perspective. I'm Bob Branco, and of course, my co-host Al Hensel, my good buddy, is also with us.
Hi,
How are
Bob.
you?
How are you? I hope
Good.
everybody else is fine as well.
Thank you very much. Before I introduce our guest for the day, I would like to thank Joy Internet Radio, Out of Sight Radio, and Radio Perkins and the Massachusetts Radio Reading Service for being kind enough to air In Perspective. This beautiful spring day, we have with us for a second time on In Perspective, Stephen Theberge. Stephen is an author. He has written a book called The MBTA Message, which is a combination sci-fi and reality book about his time at Perkins. It's a very involved story. We can talk about that. Steve is also a compliance tester with the MBTA, and he also has a lot of thoughts about social media and website testing. Welcome, Steve.
That's the first hour. Good morning. Happy spring, everyone.
Yeah, it looks like the weather is finally turning around. For those of us with spring fever, this is heaven.
Yeah. And
so
the Red Sox are doing wonderfully.
17-2 as of this recording. They're just This is a historic run. Anyway, Steve, let's talk briefly about your book, because you are an author and it's important for authors to get the word out. Now, you wrote this book back in 2015, I believe, 14. And could you briefly explain?
16 actually came out in 2016.
It came out in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain
16.
What the MBTA Message is all about?
David Fletcher reviewed it and called it a coming-of-age science fiction book. But basically, it's about two alien races that, if you can look at it like if we had life on Mars, two races that kind of coexisted and they worked together. And we were like the first planet they discovered in Egyptian times. And they're concerned about our development. But that's the sci-fi part of it. But as I've told everyone, a lot of it is based on my life at Perkins. And people that have never read sci-fi, like some of my cousins and stuff, said they really enjoy it. So it has a lot of different, you can read it at different levels. There's all kinds of issues, bullying. There's a lot of levels it can be read at. Well, I think it's mostly, or a lot of it is autobiographical, even though I don't mention Perkins specifically. So I kind of said, I want to write, I wrote two short stories when I think one at Perkins and one when I was in college, and I said, well, let's combine all these three stories into one. So that's kind of the basic premise of the book.
Yes, and of course you and I and others share the same editor, Leonore Dvorkin, and she's fabulous.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Yeah.
Indeed, we're blessed to have people like that help us out.
They're really more than the editors, because they really had a lot to do with getting the books out there into the social media, as you say, where Amazon and all the different book sites, because that for anyone, not just being visually impaired, it's a real challenge just to get that formatted and to get it in the right out there in the right way. And because I've changed a few things on those sites, but it's really tough just to have. They're great editors and he's a great cover designer, but just to get the books out there into the online and create spaces, they do an awesome job for what they charge us. Which is almost, it's people charge so much more and you get so much less.
Mm-hmm. As an author, Steve, you must know that there is a lot of competition out there. Many, many, many people, I'd say in the millions, are writing self-published work. And so each person has an individual goal, and it's very difficult to promote and make themselves stick out among everyone else who's doing the same thing. And in a lot of cases, it's financial. We cannot afford a lot of these promotions that companies offer us to market our books. It's very, very difficult. So could you tell the listeners how you, as an author and as somebody who wants to promote his book, how do you go about doing it with your limited resources and with all the competition out there?
Well, I've subscribed to a lot of online stuff. I'm sure there's scams as far as there are publishing scams as well. But yeah, I've read that there's, and that was when my book came out in 2016. There's 1 million plus self-published books. That's, we don't have agents, we don't have we don't have the traditional, that's all changed, but that's just the people that we're unknown. So that's why we're self-published. I guess, then you have the traditional market, you read all your authors, quotes, Stephen King, being this horror, sci-fi, or whatever, but those are well known. The money, yeah, it's like even, I've done a few minor campaigns on like Facebook, promoting my ads and stuff, and it can get really expensive, but even that, it's like, how do you stand out? Because, like you said, everyone wants to do the same thing. So you get 1 million plus self-published books, then you have the traditional authors, all the different genres, and they spend big, big money, and it's like, how do you become a Stephen King? And then you hear about the Harry Potter, I can't think of her name right now, but that's okay. It's like,
Danielle Steele.
Really lucky. No, Harry Potter I should know, I've read 4 books, but no, it's, anyway, it's just the name recognition, you get a certain click, and it's like, okay, somehow you could meet the right person or the right connections. It's definitely about the right connections, and someone's going to take a chance on this author because she started from like nothing. And even though the authors, like I've read all about like Stephen King and
it's J.K. Rowling's, by the way. Rawlings.
There you go. I mean, I should have known that. Like, it was early. I mean, not real early, but it's like, yeah, there you go. J.K. Rowling. That's a perfect example of like an unknown. Somebody took a chance on her, and 7 books. I mean, I am writing my sequel, but I can't even imagine. I can't imagine like some of these authors write hundreds of books. They must have ghostwriters. But yeah, it's just the competition. How do you stand out? When you look online and you see any genre, sci-fi, whatever you want, autobiographies, it's just hundreds and hundreds, thousands. It's like, how do you stand out? Where someone's going to say, oh, I want to buy that. Because it's just like a flash in the pan. It's like, oh, I read this book, sounds interesting. And of course, if you know the authors, you'll be like, oh, I'll definitely check that out. But it's just holding that attention.
So, Steve, for our listeners and especially for myself here, I want to try to see if I can get your book. I'm up on Amazon. Is it available on Kindle?
Yeah, it's on the Kindle. It's ebooks, different form. It's on Smashwords. It's very
everywhere.
Kindle's very accessible. I know a lot of people. I've actually had a lot to read my book. But,
okay, so spell the title of the book for us. It's kind of an unusual name.
Yeah, it's of course. Metche is METSCHE, message. And so if you Google that, you'll definitely come up with the book. And I also have a website with my different options for the book.
I actually have it, and it's, by the way, folks, if you can search this a number of ways, but it's Stephen with a PH, so it's STEPHEN A, and then THEBERGE, Theberge, and or the Metche message. Pronounce that again, Steve, would you?
I would pronounce it the Metche message.
Metche. And folks, again, it's if you just search through Amazon, METSCHE, and It's funny the way they have it written here, Steve, but the M and the S are capitalized. It's all one word, and then everything is lowercase, everything else.
That was actually my editors, because I was like, I don't know what to call this book, which is great.
Yeah.
I love to write, but it's like even my second book, I have no idea what the title's going to be, the sequel, but because it's two Mettons and Shennons are two alien races I was talking about.
Okay, gotcha.
They have an alliance where they get together and say, okay, we're going to go exploring the universe.
Gotcha. So folks, I like to lead by example on anything I do. So again, Steve, just for our live listeners, folks, I just listened to Steve's introduction of this book and brief summary, and I find it absolutely captivating. I'm a Kindle fan myself, so I'm going to happily spend the $2.99 and purchase this book. It's a great value. It sounds like a story that not only reflects Steve's beautiful imagination, but also it sounds like it parallels in some ways today's times. So I recommend everybody to go out there and explore buying that book as well. Thank you, Steve.
Now, Steve, you have a website. Could you just give out the website for our listeners?
Yeah, that's definitely will get you right to it's www.dvorkin, that's DVORKIN.com/ and then it's my whole name, STEPHENTHEBERGE. There's no spaces or anything there. And you don't really need the /. They always put one at the end, but it's not necessary.
Okay, so you can get Steve's book that way or through Amazon and Smashwords and Kindle.
Yeah, and that site has all the options for hardcover, Kindle, and actually, I think it's all. I'm also on. I can't read this morning. Well, they're all the options are there. It's yeah.
Great.
The different buying sites.
Super.
It's
Well,
also going to be on Perkins Library. It's going to be out shortly. They're predicting by May it's going to be an audio book.
Oh, great. It'll be on Bard, Steve?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, I don't know. It will be on Bard at some point, but it's being recorded by the Perkins Library.
Great.
So
Well, Kim does put books on Bard.
Yeah, two of Bob's books at least, maybe three, ended up on Bard through the Perkins Library, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent.
Well, good luck. We have a copy here at the house. Amy has been reading it. She thinks it's cool.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Steve, to get into another topic, you are a compliance tester. I'll say it this way. With a transportation authority. You are for lack of a better term, a monitor. Would that be right? A tester to make sure that they're in compliance with the ADA, among other things?
Yeah, that's the basic. I don't have a problem. It's MBTA. They actually released a video on YouTube, so there's no secrets about it. Basically, in 2002. A group of people from the Boston Center for Independent Living filed a class action lawsuit because it was a lot, especially the wheelchairs, because people had to wait and they couldn't get buses to work and the lifts and all that. And so it evolved into a large, we're talking a lot about lawyers and how things are evolved. But the settlement they didn't want money or anything. They just wanted the MBTA to be in compliance. And I guess in 2006 it was settled because the video came out in 2016, its 10th anniversary. I have a lot of those video thingies on my YouTube channel. But basically how it works is that I'm paired up with an observer. Now the observer does most, like all the documentation, like bus number, the driver's badge ID, what time we got on and off the bus, and the biggest one is like saying, did the stop announcements work? Now, sometimes there's mechanical issues, so the driver is supposed to be announcing the stops, or I might say, can I use the ramp? They're supposed to pull up. It's like a big checklist. It's really sounds, I mean, it is kind of, I've always said common sense, but yet again, you have to really pay attention and say, okay, did he do this? And you just kind of learn over time. It just becomes second nature. And I think the biggest thing is to stop announcements. And then sometimes there's like gray areas, like it's like you say to the bus driver, I want to get off at XYZ intersection street of here and here. And the stop announcement will say, this is your, the stop. But the driver will have forgotten to say, oh, this is your stop. So it's not necessarily a violation because it was an audible. So some things are definitely clear violations on the ADA, like there's no stop announcements. If there's more than 5 stops on the route, they have to do that. I think that's probably the most known, the biggest one. And I always had an issue with the because they have the signage like for people that can see. It will show the stops. And I've always said, okay, that's great. If you're deaf, you can read it. If you're blind, you can hear it. Now, if you're deaf blind, I have seen no accommodation whatsoever. Like you practically need like a braille display thingy, and it would, you know what I mean? I don't think they've addressed that issue. I mean, thank God I'm not in that situation, but that's going to be a challenge. But I enjoy it because I get to learn about the T. I never realized there was so many bus routes. I mean, it's unbelievable, the duplication in that system. I mean, it just keeps them like the settle. That was the thing with the settlement. They didn't really worry about cash. They just said let's do the. And now I understand from watching the video or listening to it. It's that the MBTA model, or that model coming out of a lawsuit, is actually becoming a model for the country as far as other transportation systems. So people always say, they talk about lawyers and how people say how they have negative things about lawyers. But unfortunately, sometimes, because there's no such thing as ADA compliance police, so the only avenue we have is the courts. I mean, we can educate people. And it's great when they listen, and it's great when people say,
Steve?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There you are.
I don't know what was the last thing you heard. But.
Yeah, no, I heard almost everything. So it sounds as though, things are going very well, that the MBTA is trying its best, from what I understand. I mean, they're not perfect, but they are trying.
That's my take. Yeah, I mean, I think they're trying their best, and people compare always. I mean, you see these things on online, like, oh, look at what they're doing in the Netherlands, and that's great. And then people turn around, why don't we do that in the U.S.? I said, well, we're trying. It's hard to compare one to the other because I mean, the United States versus the Netherlands population is like, and considering we don't really invest in public transportation like smaller countries. It's not really comparing apples and oranges. I mean, you say the Netherlands, that's great. I'm glad they have all that stuff going on for the people with disabilities. But we have such a large country. I mean, people don't realize. And yeah, there hasn't been a big investment in public transportation or even our whole infrastructure. I mean, that's a whole other debate or a topic because it's not a high priority. So considering what the T is doing, and I'd like to compare. Like, if I had the time and money, I'd love to go, especially the big cities like Chicago, New York, and compare and see how they're doing on the. I think we do pretty good because, like I said, the MBTA is that whole testing thing is I guess a model for other transportation systems in the country, and even. Because, like I said, the suit is pretty much, or the settlement, or whatever they're calling it, is pretty much settled. But the MBTA is still invested in the. They're not going to say, okay, we took care of that. We don't have to do it anymore. So it's funny how we turned. You could say, oh, they could pay money, but now that they're in the position that they're hiring people with disabilities to make sure the system is. So it's better to. It's kind of an ironic situation. Like you say, oh, you're going to pay so and so much money, but now that she is committed to the future, where they're not going to just say, okay, we had the legal thing is done and we're done. But they want to continue. They have public meetings every month with the general public can put input, and they always want, the testers and observers are really important because it's more documented and specific to such and such a route. But they welcome public input, like all about everything.
Steve, I have before, because it feels like we're about to evolve maybe soon into a different subject, and before Bob Branco actually transitions into anything else, I have two questions for you in regards to your explaining about MBTA compliance. First of all, let me say you sound really impassioned about what you do, and it sounds like as you are on the job, you're learning, you're understanding more and more of the minutia that surrounds what's going on out there. And you are, I just think of you as like super fair in your mind about how you look at this whole situation. And I'll get to that in a sec. My first sort of light introductory question that came to mind is, as you go through your job, and I do have two questions, as you go through your job, Steve, throughout the course of your day, do you ever find yourself getting harassed by people?
I really can't say I've had any. Some people are jerks, but and they want to. I think the worst one thing I've ever had is people wanting to help, like over helping with
Right.
cane or put their arms around you, and say, hey, well, this isn't a date. It's like, but
that's good.
Harassment, and I'm sure there are plenty of them, but I guess I've just got lucky because I've never really been. I guess that's a form of harassment. I don't know.
Yeah, not really. I'm thinking more like, do people ever snarl at you? Do they get in your face and yell at you and say, hey, what are you doing? Do any of the drivers ever get angry or impatient with you when you and your document recorder walk around doing your job? Do you ever encounter anything like that that's over the top?
I've run into some drivers that were in bad moods, but it wasn't specifically, I don't think, disability related. Some nasty people out there. But the thing with the observer-testers relationship is that I kind of call myself, it's kind of funny because I've said there's no ADA police, but I almost some days feel like I am a cop, especially when they're violating, because then I have to write up too. Because, like I said, the observer does all this very specific, but then they want a consensus on, like, what happened. Like, one day my observer got off the bus before I did, and I asked for the ramp, and it didn't work, and he pulled up to the curb, so he was, but unfortunately, the observer didn't, for whatever reason, nobody's perfect, got off the bus and didn't notice that, so I was like, I sent it in and said, well, we're not calling you a liar, but we need like two people to say, yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating because, and I don't want to personalize it, but there is somebody I work with that's a little, at times, not 100%, but nobody's 100%. I've screwed up too.
In other words, it's sort of lax about it.
Why am I here? But overall, we get things done.
Yeah.
And you said you had another question?
Yes. So
on the job, people always say, what's your dream job? I never would have thought this was going to be it, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah, you do. You seem to. And it's for a good cause. All right, so we're kind of leading into my second question, Steve, and that is, you said something that really hit home for me. And first off, we did a segment a little while ago when it was a hot item on ADA-ER, which is the Americans for Disabilities Act education reform. And that bill, I heard, is now, for all intents, pretty dead. So that's probably not going to go through. So now we're kind of left, I guess, to carry on with ADA in trying, not necessarily Massachusetts, but there are 4 key states that have these huge monetary non-compliance laws in effect that are causing lawyers out there, and I guess you'll get to that, to take, let's say, extra liberty. My question for you, you mentioned that you're building a model, and it sounds really good, Steve, because you just sort of touched on it, but I want you to circle back, if you would. You're doing, through the MBTA, you're more concerned about the main objective, and that is that people comply with disability situations, not necessarily with money, paying out money, but let's just fix the things that are out there. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on how you guys are keeping things on the straight and narrow? Because it sounds like you are.
Well, the basic premise is that the bus drivers do get educated. I don't think it's, and I'm not sitting in on these bus driver trainings, but they do get training about the basics of, how do you secure a wheelchair in the bus and all that stuff. But the thing is, if you don't have people taking the bus every day that have disabilities, you might get rusty. So I think, and I've said this a million times, when you're more in the center of the city, where there's more people, most bus drivers are going to run into somebody with a disability, but it really depends on the routes and how they, when they give us our routes, we'll take at least six different routes and just to test it out. So they try to figure out where there's issues on the system and where, and it's not, I joke about saying I'm a cop, but they really want to educate the drivers, and most of them are all right. I've heard stories. There are some drivers they just don't care about it, and they try to. They want an educational approach. That's why I like the model, because say, well, they're in violation, so we want money. That's gonna give an impression that people are gonna get angry. So it's like, I got a speeding ticket. Yeah, you shouldn't be speeding, and the law is what it is. But the ADA doesn't really. Well, that's up to the lawyers. But the ADA doesn't really specify money damages. It just says you're in compliance, and there's a lot of gray areas too. But it's more as an educational kind of thing. I think I look at it that way.
Yeah. No, and that's the way it should be, I think, Steve.
Yeah, that's my whole point. It's like, like I said, unfortunately, I don't know anyone when they had this lawsuit, well, it's a settlement, but whatever you want to call it, it's sometimes it's really the only avenue you have. Without, like I said, I don't know the whole specifics of the case, but you can educate and you can say you're in violation, and then you have to say, okay, how do we proceed? Because it's unfortunately, like I said, we don't have police for a lot of things, really. I mean, police. You think of police for more like emergencies, the hard criminal stuff, but most of our society, we don't really have overseers. We have to advocate, be our own advocates, because there is no ADA cop. There is no and the court should be the last resort.
I agree. Thank you.
Speaking of which, this is a segue, and I'll take the bull by the horns here for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll have Steve divulge what he wants, and Al, you can chime in anytime you want as well. But speaking of compliance and testing, about 11 months ago, I was offered to do some website evaluations as a blind person on behalf of other blind people, because let's face it, many sighted people, when they design websites, they want to put pictures on the sites. And of course, that's okay. I suppose it's attractive. It's good marketing, and that's nice. The problem is that screen readers for the blind have difficulty capturing the picture. So in other words, what happens is that we, the blind, can't navigate on a lot of the websites like we want. So this lawyer, along with a team of other lawyers from throughout the country, decided that they're going to recruit blind website testers.
Bob, should we mention the lawyer and his firm by name on this?
I'll leave that up to Steve.
Okay.
So we are asked to do that, and apparently they get these complaints about these sites, and then they send the sites out to us to test. Originally, we thought we were going to get paid more consistently. As it turns out, to make a long story short, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, we only get paid by this organization for evaluating websites if the company doesn't do its job and fix it. It goes to court and restitution is awarded, and we get paid through the restitution. To make it clearer, the organization of lawyers prefers that the blind people who work for them are not employees, but rather that they are clients. They would rather see us as clients so that lawsuits could be filed on behalf of us, and therefore, if we win, we get awarded a paycheck. I have a little problem with that procedure. For one thing, there may be a public relations issue as far as blind people going to work for private industry. I mean, if this is continuous for a long time, industry might think that, oh, these blind people, they just want to sue private industry. And that's not going to help the blind achieve gainful and productive employment. We want to be respectable. I'm not saying that we go out and just sue the company directly. The process is more involved than that. The bottom line is that apparently if we don't sign retainer agreements with this team of lawyers who are recruiting website testers, they will terminate our relationship. They prefer it that way. See, I would prefer to be an employee who's testing websites for a sustainable income.
Yeah, I could go on, but yeah, you've had John Bosco on I think before.
Not on this program. On Branco Broadcast.
So that was Leonard Cosgrove LLC. There's no secrets about it. He's on. I mean, I wouldn't have worked for him because I checked him out online because he found me on LinkedIn totally by accident. And I guess I didn't really think I was an employee, but I'm not saying he was deceptive. But the reason we found out about this recently is because he basically was representing us. Like he was the one, the middleman. And now he said basically you can work with these companies directly. So now we know like the underbelly of the beast, as you want to call it. And yeah, it's kind of a strange relationship as far as like not being employees and being like kind of client lawyer. I mean, I've gotten pretty good compensation over the months and you know, like I knew I wasn't. I guess I kind of might have thought I was an employee earlier on because, like I said, John didn't really explain it. Like these guys, at least are honest in saying this is what we're doing. And like I said, I'm not saying he was deceptive, but I guess you get the impression of. And I think that's a whole issue. Is if we were, nobody could really afford to pay somebody full time. And I actually read some of the settlement agreements they're signing with these companies, and it's really it's a fine line because we really want compliance, and some of these companies have to get like a expert in web accessibility, and nobody likes to be told what to do, but there are lots of sites that are more inaccessible than sites that are accessible. And some companies I've worked for companies that were actually willing to pay to be educated. Like I know Sony does testing and surveys. I've worked for Fidelity Investments not recently. They pay top dollar for that kind of stuff, and I'm not even really. I don't have a degree in. They have degrees in accessibility. You can go to college to be an accessibility expert, and I thought I had a degree in computer science. I think it's unbelievable that just the levels of detail, and I mean the lawyers have to be loving it because this is not falling away because there are so many companies and so many websites, and I think it's in a way it's a good thing because it actually gets us involved because nobody really. I mean, you can read it in a book and you can go to college and say this is accessibility, PhD land, but the real people are us. We're the ones that actually are doing the testing and yeah, it would be great to say, oh, we're going to pay. I don't even want top dollar. It would be just nice to get minimum wage at home all day and testing websites. But the reality is they view us as a minority, which we are compared to other minorities. Being blind and visually impaired is like an ultra minority. So it's really hard to, yeah, we want to get paid. But most of these companies, they're not educated unless you have a connection. It means nothing. It's easy for us. It's like, oh, it's inaccessible and describe the pictures. I mean, the big companies, they're aware of it. And I think a lot of people complain about, I don't want to get into these wars about ACB, NFB, but the NFB, I don't know how they went about doing it, but you look at the accessible ATMs. They had a lot to do with that. I don't know if it was a lawsuit. It probably was. I hope not. But unfortunately, it's like that's the only way. But, I think accessible ATMs are great.
So, Steve,
and I don't belong to any of the organizations, so I don't have an axe to grind. It's like I'm not an ACB or an FB.
Right.
I say if they've done good work, give them the credit.
Right.
And they work together now. It's not. It used to be like a big war. It's like I think a lot of organizations are trying to work together as far as legislation.
Yeah, which is how it should be, and I think it probably stemmed largely from ADA having been in place now for almost 30 years. I've got a couple of there's one observation I wanted to make. See if you agree with me, and then remind me because I'm approaching 60 chronological age here, so the AND and NAND gates of memory aren't working as well as they used to. So the observation, Steve, is it sounds like with the law firm that John Bosco represents, these folks appear, and just correct me if I'm wrong on my premise, to be the spearheading of this particular effort of recruiting blind testers, potential testers, to go out there and take a look at websites and see whether they're in compliance or not. It seems to me like because it's a law firm leading this effort up, shouldn't it be an organization who is less desirous? And I hate to give lawyers in general a bad name, but this action isn't ameliorating that feeling at all. So instead of having a firm or an organization desirous of going after money of some kind because their employees have to get paid, why can't an organization be established? And this is rhetorical, I suppose, but wouldn't you feel better, I suppose, as somebody being, say, recruited, if the organization had just merely compliance as their top priority, and monetary value in the form of a lawsuit is an absolute last resort? And B, wouldn't it be easy enough for that organization to justify paying employees, i.e. web testers, on a salary or hourly basis, even with money that they could, perhaps collect from these organizations as a minimal amount? Like, so for instance, or if they did have to collect on a lawsuit, they could take some of that money and spread it out over the whole aspect of what they're doing. Is what I'm saying, does it make sense?
Yeah, but I like I said, I've read some of these settlements, and they're not really about money. It's like,
okay, that was my second question. Good.
I couldn't divulge that because it's
right.
more, confidential.
Sure.
But they, a lot of these things I see that they're more about compliance, just getting into compliance. And what I don't understand is if this law firm, they're not getting paid, like it's a last resort unless they get a monetary settlement from the court. So I don't understand their interest in pursuing it. It has to be some kind of passion. I mean, like, we can talk about the bad things about lawyers, but the legal system is responsible for my working at the MBTA, and we're doing a lot of good out there.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think it's, it's easy to say, oh yeah, lawyers are, blah blah blah. They just want money. But I've seen some of these agreements, and some of them have nothing to do about money.
Okay.
Some companies are like, oh, we don't acknowledge we did anything wrong, and it's what you'd expect. And like a lot of other ones, it's like the company's supposed to get accessibility expert, and there's a 2-year settlement thing, and that's going to cost them money, of course, too, because an accessibility expert, they don't come cheap.
There's one more thing I wanted to add one more thing too, and this is something that I've had firsthand experience with in regards to this firm, along with somebody else that I recruited out in Pennsylvania who also works for this firm. When I was talking to one of John's associates about a week or so ago, first of all, they asked me to sign a retainer agreement, which I took issue with, because I would rather be considered an employee as opposed to a plaintiff. Yeah. I mean, all I'm doing is testing websites. I don't want to be a plaintiff for any action. But anyway, they also asked me to send them a blank piece of paper with my signature on it, and they pretty much said that this was because in case they had to use my signature for any future documents, it would be there on file. Now, they did say they would let me know every time that was going to happen, but can you count on that?
Well, that's definitely a concern. I'll say for myself, they always have asked me, like, do we have your permission to do this and that? So, I know it's technically, a lot of people don't understand it, that they are doing what's in the industry, normal in that industry. So it's unusual for us because we don't see this every day, because we're basically giving them the power to represent us, which John Bosco had been doing all along. I guess we didn't really understand that. I thought I was an employee in a way, but he did. Like I said, he didn't, for whatever reason, explain it. And then he said, "Okay, I'm not the middleman, so now you work with these." So he was doing all that stuff in between, like signing, representing, getting the money when you could. Like I said, I don't want it to be about money, but yeah, I want to get paid for my work. I guess when you see my article next month in Consumer Vision, I kind of touch on all those, because I pretty much did write about this whole lawyer, specifically about the web testing more. And I do mention the ADA, my job a little, but it's timely because that is exactly what my article is about in Consumer Vision, is this whole issue.
So doesn't this sound like maybe if we could imaginatively here change the model to something more ideal? Wouldn't this be something better for somebody, a group of the blind, say the ACB, who's consumer oriented, correct me if I'm wrong there, wouldn't it be more in line with them to perhaps go to the federal government or each state, maybe a little bit more complex? I'm not sure how that structure works myself. Ask for enough money to hire compliance people in a similar way to what you're doing out on the T. And then they could employ then blind people, maybe even at minimum wage or something a little bit higher if they could afford to do that, and just have them go out there, test for compliance. If companies are found in violation, that person, that tester would report back to that neutral organization. Then that neutral organization would write a letter to the company saying you are in violation. Please, you have so many days or weeks or whatever to fix this. If, we'll work with you, please communicate back with us and let us know what your next steps are going to be. And then if they find there's a need to escalate this into a lawsuit, at that point the attorneys could be gotten involved, could be consulted. Your thoughts?
Because I was going to mention, I was thinking that a little earlier when we were talking. I said, what about, because then people don't want to hear, oh, the government's not the solution, but then again, it's like there has to be some form, and I actually like that approach because I was actually thinking that earlier. So how could the government, because we're enforcing our own laws, so I mean the government does a lot to enforce other laws, all the manpower and that probably would be ideal and it would be great, but I don't see it happening unless, of course, maybe we have to again step up and say, hey, because and I say that in my article. I'm saying, unfortunately, I don't specifically put it in those words. This is the best system we have, but if someone can come up with a solution, I'd be glad to hear another approach because this really is kind of ass backwards, I hate to say.
Yep.
You put in the cart before the horse and the lawyers.
Right. And it's intimidation. You get a company get contacted by a law firm immediately saying, we're so-and-so, and you've been found out of compliance on this. You better fix it. It's almost, if nothing else, it's kind of maybe their way, willingly, intentionally or not, of using intimidation to get people to do things.
Well, in defense of these companies, many of whom who design websites, and I'm going to stick to the website topic because that's what we're talking about. Many of these companies aren't familiar with how the blind
right, correct, Bob.
User.
Excellent point, yeah.
They're not familiar, so you can't blame them for not knowing what they're supposed to know. There's a lot of teaching moments that are going undetected.
I was thinking that the other day. That's a great point because it's like a good police officer will say, hey, you're speeding and you should be careful. It can be a real jerk and say, oh, I'm going to give you a ticket. You're gonna hate cops. But if the cop pulls you over, a police person, or whatever, and says, hey, you're going too fast. You're not supposed to do that. And be nice about it. It's like, yeah, I want to be nice about it. Say, hey, you don't even realize, and you don't want to get angry with, people, sometimes we get angry, but it's like getting angry at them because they don't even know, like Bob said. Just show them. You get more customers. But I think some of the prevailing thought is, well, that's just a minority. It's not important to us. It's not enough of a market. They always think of it in terms of dollars. But if everything's just more inclusive, it's just going to be better.
So, Steve, as we near the end of this In Perspective segment, I don't want this to be overlooked. In your opinion, because Bob and I, quite frankly, and others in his community of people, have had some very sort of back and forth intense discussion about this very issue where a law firm is in recruiting blind people as potential clients to do testing, etc. In your opinion, based on your knowledge, better knowledge, I think, the more detailed than probably Bob and I, certainly me, have had about this whole effort. Do you think that what they're doing, or give us your overall summation? Are they doing it the right way? Are they not doing it the right way? If other blind people are approached by this law firm, possibly by John himself, to with an offer to join in their effort to find non-compliant websites, is this a good thing? Give us your thoughts as a compliant officer for the T.
Like I said, if you read Consumer Vision, you'll see my article. I do have a positive spin on it. Yeah, I'd like to get paid for every key I clicked, but I guess it's my passion again here. I really want to be part of the solution, and yes, ideally, I'd like to get paid as a 9 to 5, but he's going after like really big companies. I'd really like to have a talk with him personally. I think I should do that because I see a passion there. I mean, yeah, they're lawyers, and you can say, oh, lawyers are all about money, but I've read some of these agreements, and they're not all about money. So I'm kind of curious as to what his passion is as far as because it's. Yeah, I think that it should be done a lot differently. But on the same token, it's like I'll be happy to get paid when I do, because I have gotten paid 2 or 3 times pretty well. And it's not about the money, but yeah, we are doing a job. So yeah, ideally, it would be say, hey, you could employ a lot of visually impaired and blind people and yeah, it's going to be more than minimum wage. It doesn't have to be $100 an hour.
So do you think then Steve, trying to read between the lines because you're saying so many things in few words that we may be missing some of what you're trying to communicate. Do you think the more ideal approach should be that somebody should be concentrating more on the smaller companies who might not have as much potential to offer back through the legal system or whatever, but yet many of them might be out of compliance, and perhaps we could get somebody to work with them and not necessarily scare them, but just to bring them up to speed in terms of what they could be doing better for blind people, right?
If I may, I'll interject on that one, Al, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, it goes back to the ADAER. How many of these smaller companies can afford the restitution that judges want to hand out in order for these testers?
Well, right, and I think Steve's point is that this law firm is not going after them yet anyway, that they're mostly going after big companies. And Steve, just if you could answer my question, do you think more of an effort should be made at the more numerous smaller companies who don't have as much money to work with?
Yeah, but I think if they set example, if the big companies, I do have lists of, he's going after like really big, like My Pillow.
Yeah.
I get these sites and I say, wow, this is, but like I said, they're really more into it's like the MBTA thing. It had nothing to do with money. So now who paid these lawyers if they didn't get money? Their whole goal was to just have a program at the T, which is going to go on for pretty much infinity, even after the settlement.
Sure.
So how did these, you say all these lawyers it's all about money. I mean, somebody must have paid somebody, but there are people that will have a passion and go out and say, well, do the right thing. But the smaller companies, I think you have to start with the big companies, because like you look at Microsoft and Apple and, they're kind of doing the right thing because, they have the resources, they have the knowledge, a lot of people, and it's not perfect.
And under the current system, would the testers get paid as handsomely if small companies were handed restitution?
No, I think seriously, as far as even like Fidelity and stuff, the companies that willingly pay, because they don't do it very often. I think that's the solution because they pay. I'd almost call it exorbitant fees because it's not. I'm not worth $100 an hour, and I've been paid $100 an hour, but you don't work full time. You work 2 hours every 6 months. That's not employment. Now, if they scale that down and say we're going to pay you $15, $20 an hour, you could hire 5 people to work an hour for $100 rather than paying somebody because you're a disability. I'm not even, like I said, I don't have a degree in website accessibility or, all these fancy degrees, which that's not a bad thing. It's just that we're more real world testers,
Time
You
bomb.
have to know something, but you don't have to be an expert in accessibility.
Steve, we have 1 minute, so I just want to summarize. First of all, I think you do good work as far as testing websites as well as what you do for the MBTA. I think there should be more people like you in the system to monitor what goes on. So good luck with that. Also, good luck with the sale of your book, plus the new book that you're writing. Hopefully that'll be just as successful as your first book. And we're very pleased that you came on the program. Maybe the next time you come on, we can address your thoughts about social media. I know you have a lot of thoughts about that. I've read your articles. I know how you feel. So if anybody wants to write us here at In Perspective, please do so at branco182@verizon.net.
Take care, everybody. Go safe.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Al. God bless everybody.